to introduce Iain Robertson from the Centre for History, who has amazingly found time to give this seminar, the first seminar of the autumn semester, from Lewes. Are you in Lewes Castle? Yeah. And we're very, very grateful for that, Iain, and very much looking forward to it. Just to say that Iain and Raggy and Leslie and Joe, we're all part of the, and myself, all part of...
Oh yes.
Sue, sorry, are all part of the organising group for the Ruination and Decay research theme, heart research theme this year, which is going from strength to strength. And I can see there's tons of people watching you at this very minute, Iain. So without more ado, I'll let you get cracking on what I'm sure will be an excellent seminar.
Thank you, Colin. No pressure then if there's, to quote, tons of people watching me. Right, thank you very much, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. It is, as Colin has hinted, rather a busy day for me. My own conference is just about to start in Lewes, and I've been running around like a headless chicken most of this morning trying to pick up minibuses to ferry people around the island. So if I appear slightly mad, I have a very, very good reason to doing so. I've just changed the slide. Can I just make sure that everybody is watching the PowerPoint? Okay, everybody's got the PowerPoint. If anybody hasn't, I don't know how to solve your problems. I'm really sorry. You'll just have to bear with my dulcet tones. But hopefully you can all see the slides. So I give you an opportunity to tell me you can't see the slide, and then I take it away. So sorry about that. Anyway, let me begin. And I want to begin with a very short story. And it's really appropriate that I begin telling this story here in Lewes, because I've been travelling to the Outer Hebrides for research now for many years. But when I first came here, what I encountered was a landscape that was radically different from virtually any I had encountered before. And that landscape was a littered landscape. One that was littered with the remains of past activities. Old buses without any seats. Old cars without engines. Other engines propped up on wooden blocks. Blue baling twine. Plastic sacks and barbed wire seemingly left to rot. The material left behind then. The material left behind of past activities. Activities, indeed, which give us the landscape that is the principal focus of this paper, the ruined blackhouse. The ruined blackhouse, which when I first encountered it, formed the most significant component of this landscape of left behinds, and which in and of itself was storehouse of the detritus, the debris, and the dereliction. I do like a nice set of alliterations. The detritus, debris, and dereliction of a hardscrabble way of life. Homes have been transformed into sheds. Homes have been transformed into storehouses, or seemingly left simply to rot. In what follows, I want to argue for the blackhouse ruin as a form of heritage. A materialisation of the sense of a sense of inheritance from the past, which speaks of the mundane and of the everyday. For the everyday world, indeed, is experienced through the multiplicity of our senses, and thus our heritage-scapes are shaped on a range of different corporeal and cognitive levels that become interwoven as we journey, as we sense, and as we experience. In some instances, I want to suggest, not all, and emphatically not all, but in some instances I want to suggest, the blackhouse has become a mental and material resource space. A mental and material resource space for being in the world. Emerging from a project of mine that has gathered oral histories of the relationship between land, heritage and identity, the Hardscrabble heritage which continues to adhere to the ruined blackhouse and the processes of ruination carry, I want to suggest, a powerful, effective charge. A powerful, effective charge that is constitutive of both landscape and heritage from below. Crofting and blackhouse heritage, then, is multi-layered and multi-voiced, and firmly wrapped into land and seascape. Crucially, however, this scape should not be understood as some form of passive backdrop for human activity, for human emotions and beliefs, but actually as dynamically constitutive of those self-same activities, emotions, and beliefs. Oh, I've got ahead of myself, sorry about that. This idea of ruin as Hardscrabble heritage, originates in Caitlin de Silvy's work on an abandoned Montana homestead, and indeed can be vividly contrasted to Laura Jane Smith's invocation of an authorised heritage discourse. This latter, the authorised discourse, this latter is the stuff of official heritage. It's the stuff of heritage tourism and of national identity formation. Smith sees this authorised discourse as shaping belief systems, and sees it also as deployed to maintain power and control. A hegemonic discourse, in other words. De Silvy, by contrast, recognises a significantly more subaltern form of heritage. And in her formulation, Hardscrabble signifies a landscape and an environment of survival, nothing more. A heritage formed from the struggle to maintain a way of life. A heritage formed from the sense of inheritance deriving from that struggle to maintain a way of life. Equally usefully, De Silvy draws attention to ephemeral and fragmentary objects and artefacts as heritage signifiers. Indeed, as she powerfully asserts, and now my fading in happens, as she powerfully asserts, and here I'm quoting, every object left to rot in a dank shed or in an airless attic once occupied a place in an active web of social and material relations. The tactility of these material left behinds engendering, and I'm quoting again, a vicarious, involuntary memory of the countless tiny tasks that made up the effort to survive in this place. A potent form of heritage then, but one totally at odds to the authorised discourse. And in this paper, what I want to suggest that for De Silvy's West Montana homestead, we can and should be reading a Hebridean blackhouse, which in its ruined form may be said, and here I'm quoting again George Giarmello, to be an assemblage from which an expanded form of heritageisation emerges from, and here's my quote, the unforgetting of the minor histories of landscape and acknowledging the detritus and unwanted residues and remnants of its making that persist. Such formulations, then, offer much, I would argue, for an understanding of the heritage processes at work in the cast-offs from immortal remains of the ruined blackhouse. Cast-offs from immortal remains of the ruined blackhouse that can be understood as a heritage of inattention. And that, to my argument, is absolutely crucial. This is a heritage of inattention, of overlookedness, if you want. Inevitably, however, when we're talking ruins, we must go back to the Romantics and the picturesque movement. For it is here that our profound concern for the ruin and our responses to the process of ruination, processes of ruination, took a permanently central place in heritage and preservation and conservation. Its place in heritage preservation and conservation was kind of cemented with by the moss, the lichen, and other natural invaders of the ruined form, bringing a richness and variety of tone. With time and decay, removing the visible reminders of the building process, and instead drawing the artistic eye. So that then is a very brief skip through the kind of context, very brief, very superficial skip through of the kind of context from the Romantics and picturesque that establishes the ruin firmly in the heritage canon, you can say. But critics of this approach, critics of this perspective, suggest suggest though that the memory work, the rural ruin in particular, undertakes. What it does is to locate, to fix expressions of longing for an unrecoverable past. It acts also as a signifier of passive rather than resistant responses to hegemonic power. The landscape of this, it is suggested, is a ruin that is, and here I'm quoting again, often staged, neat and picturesque, providing visitors with a disciplined and purified space. And I hope that my couple of images there illustrate that disciplined and very purified space with the wonderful clipped grassy green sward of the authorised heritage discourse in the bottom left there. There is, however, another way to look at this, to turn away from the staged, from the neat, and from the picturesque. And this is a perspective that is supported, I would suggest, by a reading of the Hebridean Blackhouse as performing counter-hegemonic memory work and materialising a heritage from below. Now, inspiration. Yeah, it's possible I've got my slides slightly out of order here. Possibly not. Yeah, no, we'll leave it there. Sorry about that. Inspiration for this view. I should have been a nice picture of a ruined factory here, really. Inspiration for this view has come from the recent literature on post-industrial ruins. This literature recognises the deeply ambiguous and complex nature of the ruin, at once present in our present, but also fundamentally of the past. For Tim Eden's work, the ruin is the past only partially erased. In this partiality, trace elements of past practices linger on in mundane spaces. Like a ghost, Edensor claims, these traces are simultaneously there and not there. Memory in this context, found in the marginalia of the past, memory in this context then is far more multiple, far more nebulous, far more imaginative than that suggested by more obvious expressions of heritage, the authorised discourse, in other words. In the abandoned factories, which are the loci of much of this work, the dirt, the debris, the detritus of past work practices, the supposedly irrelevant left behind, in other words, that which is supposedly irrelevant loudly declaims its need for attention and asserts its far from pastness. In this reading, then, decay is understood as a process generative of a different kind of knowledge. In ruination, then, ghosts remain, memories writhe, they mutate, they disrupt. Memories generated by mundane left-behinds invoke a seemingly mere unconscious use of the past. A mere unconscious use which taunts attempts to fix authorised memory. Generated through movement, through touch, through sounds, smells and sights, these memories are often impossible to constrain into the authorised and hegemonic heritage representations. It was such ghostly and anarchic hauntings I was to encounter when I first met the Blackhouse ruin. These are not the organised, orderly and commemorated remembrances of the authorised heritage discourse, but are much more the stuff, I would suggest, of heritage from below, embodying and performing, as it does, an unconscious, precognitive heritage, the recognition of which is based on the view that heritage things delineate the condition or possibility for behaviours and ways of life, and most importantly, heritage things have an agency of their own. One of the most exciting recent trends in heritage studies has been the turn towards the exploration of tangible and intangible heritages that are local, particular, and indeed mundane. Drawing on perspectives from below, such heritages offer the possibility of alternative constructions of the past. Heritage from below in this reading, then, is primarily found in lived experience, in those personal and emotional recollections of the mundane and of the everyday. And these memories find their mnemonic in everyday performances and in everyday material structures. Such space, moreover, it can be suggested, such spaces then have something of the quality of looseness about them. Spaces where activities may occur, or meanings and memories performed that are at odds with the original intentions for those spaces. Such spaces, however, have rarely been considered as an explicit subject for heritage practice. And yet, in and as loose space, this is exactly what it is, a heritage of transience, of illegibility, and of illegality. It espouses and represents an aesthetic resistance to dominant values, and is also resistant in its ephemerality. Resistant in its ephemerality to being formally recognised as heritage. There's no, with the bath abandoned, in the abandoned house there's no formal recognition of heritage there. No brown sign, no grassy sward, no interpretation panels. But heritage, I would argue, is exactly what it is. And loose heritage is exactly what the Blackhouse ruin is. It embodies those small stories and overlooked histories that expose the non-linear and fluid nature of memory. Loose heritage is embedded in the use of the past that is both difficult to represent and comprised of largely non-visual sensual experiences, to Meaden's or yet again. Further, in the multi-temporal nature of the ruined form, such small stories offer an additional layer of reworking. My apologies. From fluidity, multi-temporality, and a felt and sensed world of experience comes the opportunity for counter-narratives of the past and the opening up of untold and marginalised heritages. There is, in short, heritage value in the inarticulacy of the broken Blackhouse. So, with apologies for those of you who know far more about the history of the morphology of the Blackhouse than I, a pace back from some of the more theoretical stuff to a little bit of history. The Blackhouse, I should have a picture there, I clearly don't. The Blackhouse was generally oblong in shape. This is a hugely generalised summary here. The Blackhouse was generally oblong in shape, with few doors or windows, single story. Even into the 20th century, the central hearth without chimney was retained, although many families had moved to a chimney in the gable end of the Blackhouse. Of greatest significance to the evolutionary arc of the Blackhouse as artefact of heritage from below was the fact that the livestock were overwintered indoors, with little by way of internal division between the two sets of living quarters. And once again, that's it. There is far more I could and should have said, but that at least is a sketch, nothing more, of what we're talking about here when we're talking about the Blackhouse. Prior to the Crofters Act of 1886, of course, the Blackhouse had an existence that verged on the transitory. Fear of eviction producing a built form that was simple, that was capable of being erected in a hurry. But with the security of tenure brought about by the Crofters Act of 1886, with the security of tenure came security of housing and the concomitant drive to improve living standards. Ultimately, it was this desire to improve living standards, this desire accompanied by a drive for enhanced health and hygiene in the Highlands, which was to give rise to a new form of Hebridean dwelling place, the White House. In this transition, we therefore encounter the first of two forms of Blackhouse ruination. The first of two forms of Blackhouse ruination. Abandonment of the Blackhouse in the face of local and national welfare initiatives and the full integration of the Highlands into the national space economy. Whilst this form of ruination was not always undertaken willingly, it was at least undertaken mainly from within the crofting tenantry. In the second form, ruination came earlier and was considerably more forced and was a central aspect of that wider process we have come to call the Highland Clearances. Inevitably, clearance stories feature constantly in individual and collective memory. According to CM, his family were moved 4 times in approximately 30 years. They were first cleared to make room for a sheep farm, but once that had failed, his grandmother, CM's grandmother, returned to the same black house she had left 32 years previously. It is very easy to imagine, therefore, the emotional impact of this return and the powerful memory work that house to which she had returned after a gap of 32 years, the powerful memory work that black house must have performed. So one strand of the black house discourse establishes it as a vernacular architectural response to local environmental and socio-cultural conditions. Time, in the form of similar and related environmental and socio-cultural processes, was the cause of the ruination of the black house in its domestic form. And yet, one of the very few papers to focus wholly on the black house as form of heritage, in one of these very few papers, Hayden Lorimer explores the pioneering deployment of the black house as the locale for a folk museum. Sorry, is somebody's microphone open somewhere? Could you just check? We're getting a fair bit of interference. Thanks, folks. So as I was saying, Hayden Lorimer's paper looks at the development of the Black House as a folk museum and looks at the part it played in the 1938 Glasgow Empire exhibition. For Lorimer, in these actions, the Black House that was redeployed down to Glasgow, the Black House ceases to be any Black House, chosen just because it's a Black House, and becomes the definitive article, Black House, an icon of national memory and national identity. This first faltering step in an academic engagement with Black House was paralleled by a number of reconstruction and preservation projects within the Highlands and Islands. These are simulacra that are now firmly fixed stops on the tourist trail, and which are now wholly subject to the principles and practices of modern heritage management. Most importantly for our purposes today, the stopping of decay and the removal of extraneous matters. Modern heritage management, in other words. At both Garnon and Arnold, for instance, the reconstructed Black House becomes a living museum, accompanied by interpretation panels and interpreters. The neatly clipped grassy sward held in place by reinforcement mesh, and the turf-topped stone wall of the authorised heritage experience. This can be vividly contrasted with the unmediated ruin, in which can be found the extraneous matter, the plants, the debris, the dirt of my opening story, and which is, of course, excluded from the sanitised and authorised museum experience. And if there is an attempt to include, to offer the more authentic experience, then it is done so in the controlled, managed and categorised manner of a stage set. Here then is the front of house world of Dean McCannell's staged authenticity. And yet, we can occasionally glimpse behind the backdrop. We can glimpse behind the backdrop to experience or expose the ghosts in the machine of the unauthorised heritage discourse. In this below-stairs realm reside the unexpected memories, the unlooked-for encounters that will always intervene to destabilise attempts at authorised and hegemonic memory work. The Arnold Blackhouse complex is now the most visited site on the island of Lewis. Here we are. Less so today, but certainly in the recent past, the approach to and route away from the Arnold site passed through a completely unrestored makeshift landscape of abandoned croft houses and reworked and ruined black houses. The Arnold setting, therefore, and the route in and out offered that counter-hegemonic challenge to the romanticised heritage experience of the Arnold site itself. What this further suggests, then, is that the Blackhouse heritage discourse can take another, perhaps more powerful form. Beyond question, heritage is life, space, and place. It is open to and shaped by effective intensities and unexceptional and everyday interactions. It is also embodied movement and draws on looseness and entropy to make and maintain heritage meanings nurtured by ruination and decay. In this, the presence of the ruined Blackhouse and the presence of the ruined Blackhouse heritage is reinforced by the fact that it was often the locus from which acts of resistance and protest were launched. As such, the Blackhouse was the material manifestation of this counter-hegemonic discourse. By extension, I would argue, the broken Blackhouse represents a counter-hegemonic heritage, a heritage expressed for and from below. And yet we cannot ignore the fact that in many instances the traditional house form was abandoned and was lost. According to DM, in her township at its most populous, the first 2 decades of the 20th century, here I'm quoting from my interview, there were over 500 people in the village, and there were 33 thatched houses. There's not one today. There's even very few of their ruins left. Now, whilst there may be an element of regret here, regret for the loss of powerful mnemonics of a past way of life, whilst there may be an element of regret then in these statements and memories, there is equally, I would argue, very little evidence of a romanticising or a nostalgic sentiment at play here. It is this absence of nostalgia, romanticisation, it is this absence, I'd argue, which locates the ruin as expression of heritage from below. Expression of heritage from below, drawn from everyday experiences and ordinary life worlds. Take, for example, I had the cover on that slide of that wonderful book, Children of the Blackhouse. Take, for example, the tuberculosis narrative found in Children of the Blackhouse. In the township at the centre of the narrative, 1 in 3 families were affected by TB, and many blackhouses were abandoned as a consequence. As Callum Ferguson relates, and here I'm quoting from Children of the Blackhouse, successive generations of parents have forbidden their children to enter the ruins or play in their vicinity. Indeed, until this day, nobody has removed any of the stones, nor disturbed the sites in any way. They remain as reminders. Most significantly, inevitably of course, there's been no attempt at overt memorialisation, no interpretive panels. The memory traces performed and embodied in the ruined form generate a sense of inheritance from the past that is the antithesis of the romanticised nostalgia generated by the authorised blackhouse reconstruction. These memory traces are also as much a material resource as they are a mental resource. Indeed, this is perhaps the single most important indicator of the ruin as a heritage from below, as a material resource then. It is something that is used in everyday life, as much as it is the material to family and a past way of life. And even as a form of unconscious memorial, the memories generated by the Blackhouse ruin are of everyday taskscapes. Thus, a significant number of my interviewees revealed the strong reluctance of elderly relatives to leave the Blackhouse. In so doing, our interviewees perhaps also revealed their own reluctance to wholly abandon this heritage. Diane's family remained in the Blackhouse whilst her great-grandmother was alive. After a respectful period following her death, it was converted to stabling. Similarly, KGM's granny refused to move out of the Blackhouse when his uncles moved into the present house in 1954. Again, after the grandmother's death, the old house ultimately became a buyer. And in KGM's own words, when you went in there to milk or feed the cows, it was beautiful and warm. When I go into my buyer now, it's freezing cold in there. It is this intense connection between past generations and quotidian practicalities which frame the power of the ruin as heritage. Here's a longer quote here, or a longer discussion I had with one respondent. You can see it on the PowerPoint. I won't actually pause to read it out too far. But the end quote, it's all telling, of course it is, but the old house is falling down. Every single person that's related to me wants me to knock it down, get it together, and I have been resisting. That Blackhouse then remains visible in the crofting landscape as a ghostly presence. As a ghostly presence and power precisely because of this individual and collective sense of inheritance from the past. As KRM relates, and I'm afraid I haven't got this quote up on the screen in front of you, the land is telling us so much. There are, things you don't see that are so obvious when they're pointed out to you. But when someone points out the boundaries, points out old houses, you realise that these places were attached to them and were important to them. The history of these peoples embedded in the land here. And by extension, the history of these peoples embedded in the ruin also. Such connections to land and people are also connotative of very distinct local times and spaces, with the ruin generating deep sensual and emotional jolts. One interview characterised this connection as with his patch, and summarised it thusly. What is this patch made up of? Break it down if you can into its bits and pieces. What is it made up of? Is it people? Well, it was probably made up of people, that was part of it. But there's no people now, really. People, the land, the house, the sheep, the dogs, everything. Used in these ways, the broken black house embodies memory, drawing the past into the present, in using the ruin in everyday activities, even in just gazing on it. Memory, time, and space are called into being and made anew. Now, in this understanding of memory work, I've been inspired by David Crouch's suggestion that memory is less performed than it is in performance. Throughout history, wherever and whenever the voice and collective memory of the crofter and cotter is heard also the consistent claim for access to land. At the heart of this claim can be found the arrays of beliefs, practices, and traditions which structured how crofters and cotters interacted with their environment. These beliefs structured how crofters and cotters worked their land, in the past but also in the present. Through their bodies, crofters expressively perform who they are by drawing on a near subliminal sense of inheritance from the past. This is feeling and remembering through doing. And it is, I would suggest, the very embodiment of both place and sense of smell. Sense of self. The actions of tractor, of sheep, boat and lobster pot, to name but a few. Cultivate a direct connection to previous generations who nurtured their own identities in the same soil and on the same water. An engagement with an expression of landscape as an enduring record of the lives and works of past and present generations who have dwelt within it. In this, the black house is central. As locus of work tasks and of the dirt, dust and debris of past works, lost in place. The ruined black house locks together past and present in a spatially manifest dance. Further, in that the ruin speaks to the individual of family, home, and that which is past, but which must be retained. This heritage from below, then, assists in the ongoing making and maintaining of local identity. Landscape, taskscape, and ruinscape, acting and interacting in concert to shape and constitute a dynamic sense of being in the world. And now, my conclusions. This paper has taken a particular landscape, rural landscape of ruination as its focus. Working with individual memory, with oral histories and collective memory, the broken black house emerges as a mnemonic from within of a very particular form of heritage. That heritage is emphatically not that of the authorised black house, with its interpretation panels, clipped grassy swards and trained volunteers. Instead, ours is a heritage that is just there, made manifest in the appropriateness of letting go, of decay and of dissolution. The view adopted here of the heritage work performed by the Black House derives from the rise of an explicitly critical heritage studies. From this new way of seeing have come questions around memorialisation, the representation of the past, what heritage futures might look like, and whether some interventions by the heritage industry are even desirable or necessary. In moving to and through the ruined blackhouse space, folks perform the past by putting our bodies into its flow, drawing it into the present, both unconsciously and subliminally. In other words, it is possible to embrace unknowingly the past in the present, building an empathetic and sensual apprehension with informality and letting go the touchstones, opening up the possibilities for a heritageization that passes and is past, unrecognised and uncelebrated. Clearance and crofting landscapes and the ruins they have engendered speak of a symbiotic relationship between order and disorder, past and present. The spatial order imposed through the creation of the crofting way of life and the clearances haunting and working through present-day spatial arrangements. But also lurking here are the spectres of past disorderly behaviour, the actions of crofters and cotters in seizing and recovering land to which they believed they were entitled by the fact of family inheritance. This belief is clearly influential in the decision of some to retain the ruin rather than completely remove it. The connection to family and land thereby materialised manifests both individual and collective cultural heritage. But at the same time, the blackhouse can fulfil an important role in an everyday life, perhaps as animal shelter or storehouse. Thus, for present-day members of the crofting community, the blackhouse is understood and experienced as both heritage and everyday artefact, which, encountered in a bodily way, is used to inform memory. This everyday artefact, then, is far from irrelevant, wholly of the past, or excluded from heritage discourse. Instead, the ruined blackhouse materialises a Hardscrabble heritage, an accidental archive, a repository and mnemonic of a heritage often hidden from plain sight. In performing tasks of memory in this Hardscrabble landscape, the meaning and purpose of these ruins and the process of ruination is sensed, is known, and is understood as a mundane form of inheritance from the past. This is heritage as process that is both loose and spectral. Unbidden and unseen, it haunts our everyday lives as an anti-monument. To put it another way, the blackhouse as storage and milking shed is both locus for present-day muscular performances, but is also memory site of past muscular engagements and family. As mnemonic of a world we have lost, only in their authorised heritage form does the ruin invoke only predictable nostalgia. More routinely, blackhouse ghosts are active, dynamic, and constitutive elements of being in the world, essentially embedded in everyday habitual tasks. Component of and resource for everyday existence, the practical nature of their utility draws the blackhouse into the present as a powerful rendering of heritage from below. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iain. Did you hear that applause?
I did, Colin. I was most impressed. Thank you.
I mustn't be selfish and self-centred and hog all the questions.